Welcome to the Military Transition Academy's PM Pathfinder series, where Max Rogers, former enlisted Marine turned naval officer and civilian energy industry project manager extraordinaire, teams up with the former Navy enlisted and Army officer candidate Eric Doc Wright, Vesta PM's founder and best-selling author, alongside Jeremy Burdick, a retired Air Force chief, aircraft mechanic and aviator turned civilian operations chief and process specialist for Vesta PM and the PDU University, bring you an audio-video suite to help you find the path while mentoring you in the profession of project management. Along the way, you can study for your CAPM, PMP, PMI-ACP, Scrum Master certifications, or just maintain your professional development units in a casual, enjoyable conversation between friends. Okay, today's episode is going to be over how we distinguish between a project, program, and portfolio. Then we're going to move to project versus operations. And then we'll finalize it with the difference between predictive and adaptive approaches. What the difference between a project, a program, and a portfolio are. So we've also got Doc here, expert project management, extraordinaire, and then, like I said, we've got Max. So, in the world of the military, a lot of times we think like a project is a go-do tasker. And then a program, a lot of times you get a continuity book where you're running these programs with lots of different little projects. And then we don't really talk a ton about portfolio. That word's probably not used. It's sometimes like used when you're talking about your entire experience skill set. Like that's my portfolio of experience. But let's unpack it a little bit. And we'll start with you, Max. Give us kind of some thoughts on what the difference between those portfolio, program, and project are.
Well, the simple answer is, a project is one, a portfolio is several, and then it goes up from there. So it's a scale of the magnitude of what you're doing. Most people, start off as a project manager, and you're allowed to focus on everything that's associated with that project in order to make that project successful. And as you go and lead a project and work with a project team, you gain experience and you gain knowledge. And so then the second project you handle, regardless of how similar it may be to the first project, it's easier to do because you know how to put together a project plan. You know how to put together a communication plan. You know how to put together a change management plan. And so those things are fairly simple. And so then as you progress on, then your capability presents itself that, hey, you can handle more than one project. That for me personally, that happened when I worked at Oceaneering in a manufacturing facility. We were manufacturing subsea control umbilicals. And it starts out, every new project manager is given a project to manage, and he manages that project, takes it through to fruition and delivery to the client, and sometimes even goes offshore to installation. But then your bandwidth expands, and then you can give a project manager a couple more projects to do, either similar projects or different projects, and they're able to handle it. So, and then that grows. And so, and we never really differentiated between a project manager and a project manager that was managing multiple projects. They didn't call him a portfolio manager, but it was a logical progression. As the new guys would come in and they would get a single project, and then they'd have multiple projects, and then they would have this litany of projects. Typically, maybe you would do all of the umbilicals for Shell or all the umbilicals for Exxon, because of the one of the important parts of project management is this relationship building that you develop with the client, and they were comfortable with you, and you didn't have, after managing projects for a client for 3 years, you didn't have to spend near the time explaining to them why you were doing something, or why they needed to sign a change order, or why things needed to be done different with the schedule, or things like that, because you develop that trust and that between you and that relationship. And as long as you were producing and proving that you were looking out for their best interest, they were perfectly comfortable in letting you run that project, and realizing that you were in this great big organization that was running dozens of projects, and you couldn't be the guy that was always in conflict with everyone else who was also trying to do the same thing you were doing. So,
oh, perfect answer. Yeah, I like it, and I like how you say it's more of a scale, right?
yes.
It's project, and then project, maybe program, and then project, program, maybe portfolio. So it's like a hierarchy. Doc, what do you got to add?
So just to unpack a couple small wrinkles there that Max hit on. So the first thing is he mentioned experience, and he mentioned being able to put together a project plan. So you will use your experience as the lens through which you view the project at hand. And yes, every project gets a plan. Some of them may be 9.5 inches thick. Some of them may be, 9 centimeters thick. It's on you, the project manager, in concert with the customers and the project team, to figure out how much planning you need to do and how thick the plan is, right? The other thing, and your experience will tell you that. The other thing too, Max was talking about program manager. We see a lot of veterans coming out of uniform, especially when rank is involved. Hey, I was the E8, I was the E9. Hey, I was the 05, I was the 06, right? So I'm the XO, or I'm the, command master chief, or whatever I am. So yeah, I get it. But when you walk into the civilian interview and you say, hey, I'm the program manager. Well, program manager means something very specific. It means you're not the guy or gal running project X, project Y, project Z. It might even mean you're not the guy or gal running related groups of projects. It's a title, it's a role, usually in the PMO, and you own a piece of the strategy, and you literally aren't putting your hands on any projects or programs. You're running the admin to keep all the resources aligned and deconflicted with all the other programs going in the organization. You're a resource manager in basic function, right? So when you come out and say, I'm a program manager, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but you still need to have that tactical capability, influence stakeholders, put together a team, write a plan to get things done. And like Max said, and they don't talk about this at all in the PMBOK, to my knowledge, a project manager, part of your most critical function is establishing and maintaining good working relationship with stakeholders and vendors, because they're part of the project team. They get to vote in how you execute, right? So you gotta appreciate their input. And whether you're doing an agile or not, now all the rage with agile is, hey, make sure everybody's included. Well, us project managers been doing it for a long time. We're including those folks from the get-go anyway, right?
Yeah.
And your comment, Doc, just spurred something in my mind also about here, relating this to life in the military as far as projects, programs, and portfolios. Typically, I think my experience was petty officers and NCOs were project managers, or they managed projects. Staff NCOs and chief petty officers were the program managers. And then the chiefs and the E8s and E9s and the 05s and 06s, they were the portfolio managers. So there is almost a direct correlation. So that's why one of the things I appreciate what you guys are doing is that you're offering this path for guys, whether or not you've only spent 4 years in the military or you've spent 30 years in the military, doesn't make any difference. You've still been exposed to project management, and you still have experience as a project manager. The guy that stays 25 to 30 years, yeah, he's probably going to be a portfolio manager because he has that experience coming out of the military, whereas an E4 can still function perfectly well as a project manager because he's been managing projects. I mean, an engine mechanic, who guy's in charge of a maintenance crew, he's a project manager because he has to manage his material and his people and his schedule every single day.
Yeah, I was just going to use that example because I was an engine mechanic. I was going to use that so when I was running a shop, right, you've got project, rebuild turbine. Okay, great. Project manager. I'm running a team of 3, 4 guys running, turbines through kind of an assembly line, but it's all resourcing. It's all making sure the parts are there. It's making sure they're care and fed, right? It's building that team camaraderie, setting out goals and purpose and vision. And then the next level up was, hey, you're the area manager. You're running turbines, gearboxes and kits. All right. So now I'm running multiple project teams. That's program. And then take it a one step further. How about all engine replacements in the Pacific Air Forces, right? That's portfolio, because now you've got not just this engine, but you've got this engine shop over here and this engine shop over here. So you're multiple programs. However, a project can stand alone, right? You can stand by yourself as a project manager and do a project for one-offs. So, in the civilian world, and maybe you got a better example is, a guy's got a donut shop and they want to figure out a new way to make a donut. You don't need a program for that. You maybe just need a project, and it can stand by itself.
Exactly. And in the world of technology that we live in today, that happens on a daily basis in most companies. I was just having this conversation with my wife this morning, talking about how so many companies purchase technology and software programs because a great sales force comes in and sells them on how to use it. I worked for a company one time that bought a complete SAP software system for enterprise management system. They bought the whole entire portfolio except for the project management module. And because the accountants were in charge of purchasing the software, and they got what they needed and worked just fine, but the project managers struggled every month doing monthly reports, because going back to break out the cost and to figure out where you were at financially, you had to develop these exquisite pivot tables and use an Excel spreadsheet in order to figure out how much where you're at with your cost. And if they had just went ahead and purchased the project management module with it, it would have done all that for you. But a project needed to be executed within the company to determine that their program and project management software wasn't working properly.
Yeah, no doubt. So, as we unpacked the project, the program, and the portfolio, any parting last bits, Doc, before we move to projects versus operations?
No. Oh, I got a favorite story I'm going to tell about Max. He told me this years ago, and I've shared it in every class since. So, yeah, I can't wait to get to this topic.
Yeah. All right. Last bit on the project program portfolio. Why would a company even have a program instead of just run a bunch of projects? What's the benefit of having a program or a portfolio?
Scale and efficiencies. The efficiency is the big thing. You've got tremendous cost efficiencies. And I've got a great example for that. This umbilical manufacturing company I work for, we made all these specialty control umbilicals that had different numbers of tubes and different numbers of electrical cables in it to support a client's particular requirements. But then we also manufactured this hose that was used for every blowout preventer that's in the drilling force out in the world. And it was just standard collapse resistant hose. And we would just make tens of thousands of meters of this stuff and kept it on reels in the plant, so that whenever someone called for, hey, I need 10,000 meters of 2 7/8 inch, collapse resistant hose for my BOP, I got it. It'll be on a truck tomorrow, headed that way. That you needed a constant updated project plan to run, to make sure that you always had that hose in inventory. But it wasn't something that you had to sit down and start from scratch from a new project and sit down and develop the project plan from it. It's like what Doc was saying earlier. Some of the custom projects had a 9.5 inch thick project plan, but the stuff that you're basically just manufacturing for basically it's an off the shelf item. The project plan for that was four sheets, and that's all you needed.
Beautiful.
It just had to be manufactured and tested and then dated and stored properly.
Great story. Great example. So efficiency and scale. I love it. Like, I think that's what you really need to know out of why you would even have a program or a portfolio. They can see things that are in multiple projects or multiple programs to where you can buy in bulk. You can have stuff on hand. It's just, you can seek those efficiencies, and it's a great story. All right. So now to project and operations. We've been talking projects. So let's flip the script and go over to an operations. Doc, fire away with your story.
All right. So the very first time I met Max in person, his gracious wife is joining us for dinner, and we're sitting there having some bourbons, and Max, I think we were having barbecue, right? Remember we were at the brewery station or wherever?
We were in San Antonio. I remember that.
That's right. JB, you've probably been there, but Max was explaining this operations and project management and risk management. And he said, hey, look, Eric, this is simple. When you're in the field, or I think he said, when you're on the rig, you've got operations manual and you've got risk management manual. This is when conditions are not as expected. And the key was, Max told me, is Eric, you can only have, because he knew, he had to Eric proof it. He said, you can only have one of those manuals open at any given time during the project. You either have the plan open because everything's going just like you planned it. And when it doesn't, when it goes south, you shut that one and you open the risk management one. We're in emergency ops now. What do? Reporting has to happen a little bit faster. Risk management and assessment has to happen faster. Like, decision-making has to accelerate. And he said the key is you can only have one open at a time. When the risk resolves, shut the risk one, open the operations one. So when I would teach every class thereafter, Max, years ago, that's what I would tell those folks is, hey, look, PMI would tell you to shove the risk management plan inside the project management plan. But that project management plan is the assumption that everything you've planned, everything you've resourced, everything you've staffed, all the requirements are going just like you planned them. And we all know, man, reality T-bones that project plan first intersection it comes to after you drive it off the lot. So what I always train my folks to do is pull the risk management piece out, have separate conversations in risk assessment sessions that are held separately from project status meetings. Have the smart folks in the room that know the project and know the work, and the difference between that and normal operating procedure, know to run the operations plan if the project's going like it's supposed to, run the risk management plan if it's not. That one concept for me personally on projects and for project teams I've coached has really helped provide clarity to the team about which one should be open right now. Even having everybody on that same page can go a long way in speeding up communication decision-making.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Good story. I like it. And, and in reality, when you have an operations plan open, it probably has a checklist in it because you've done it before. Like, it's, hey, bang, we're operating. This is how we operate. We come in, we salute, we do formation, we go get a toolbox, and then we go find out what problems we have. And then we get to the problems, that airplane that's broken, or that engine that needs fixing, or that patient that needs worked on. That would be then a project, because that's going to be temporary, unique, to produce some kind of product, service, or results. I mean, that's like the PMI definition, but how you got there was operations, because you woke up, you got dressed, you got to work, you checked out your box, you did, that's the checklist mentality. So I'd love to hear what you got to expand on that, Max.
Well, that story that I told Doc was from years of experience that I had in multiple applications that always was the same thing. And whether I was on dive station in the Navy as a diving officer, whether or not I was strolling past the reactor control department on a submarine, or I was in the cockpit of an airplane, two books, the operations procedures and the emergency procedures. And there should only be one book open at any time. You start with the operations procedures, and you're right, it's filled with checklists. And the benefit of checklists are twofold. Number one, it ensures that nothing is missed, nothing is skipped, and everything is done in the proper order. Number two, the thing that I always thought was the most valuable part of it is it creates this documentation trail, that by having a physical checklist that, yeah, you check this box, you put your initials, you put the date and the time by that this task was accomplished, then you're going along, and then something happens and throws you outside your normal operating procedures. You close that operating procedure, you open up the emergency procedures, and the first thing you do is document the date, time, and place that we initiated this emergency procedure. And you start executing the checklist in the emergency procedure. And like I said, it doesn't make any difference if you're in the cockpit of an airplane, or if you're at the reactors controls board in a nuclear submarine, or you're on dive station and you got divers down under pressure and something is going wrong or going as planned. Either way, OPs and EPs, and that is directly applicable to in running a project. And I agree with Doc 100%. I would produce my risk management plan as part of my project plan, but I never put it together, because I looked at it as, if my project plan is effective, I don't need my risk management plan. And if I need my risk management plan, my project plan obviously is not working. So no sense wasting time with that anymore. And so I got to deal with this. And it allows clarity. It allows you to focus. And like I said, most importantly, it allowed documentation, because after the fact, when the fires are all put out and everybody's sitting around and you're called upon up in this big conference room on the green carpet and standing behind the 140-year-old oak table, and people are asking you questions about, why did you do that? And just like in a project, if the first words out of your mouth is the contract section 3.2.7.7 dictated that I do this, when you're standing in front of a board of inquiry, if your first answer is emergency procedure 1.6.2 dictated that I do this, or operation procedure 3.2.7 required to do this, and that didn't happen, and it said, if this doesn't happen, go to the EPs. And so I went to the emergency procedures. Then it's a huge shield that you have to stand behind, because the procedures that are developed for operation procedures and emergency procedures are done in a calm state, when nothing is going wrong, and you can think and you can troubleshoot things and you can spitball and brainstorm things. And then you put all these things together, because when you really need an emergency procedure, you don't need to take the time to figure out, okay, now what should I be doing? And you should be responding.
Beautiful. Great example. And coming from a flight engineer, that is 100% accurate. When you start opening the emergency checklist, everything else shuts. We work the emergency till the emergency's done. And it is a shield. It is a sense of, hey, I'm following the guidance that when it was ground speed 0 and 1G and everything had all the information available, we made these decisions. This is going to be the safest procedure we can run in this scenario. And when you're actually in the emergency, you usually have minimal information and almost no time to really digest it. So it has to be kind of second nature. So I love the way you put that. A project manager should build his risk plan in an environment with experts that have seen or done it before and have been in part of some of those scenarios. That way, when you build that risk management plan or emergency procedures, if you will, it should work, right? I mean, and that's beautiful.
And one more thing, Jeremy, once you build that, when you're building that risk management plan, make sure that all the stakeholders are involved and get them to agree that in the event that this happens, this is what we're going to do in the emergency. Now, and as you go through your emergency procedures, there should be a pause button. There should be a point that you can stop and take a breath and you can reevaluate what you're doing. Okay, number one, is this being effective? Is this doing what we thought it would do and plan to do? Or do we need to, we're at a point now, we can at least take 10 minutes to stop and think about this and discuss it. But like I said, you get the stakeholders buy-in on your risk management plan. And then when you're stepping and fetching and someone comes up and goes, hey, why are you doing this? Because this is what my risk management plan says, that it was signed off by the stakeholders.
Oh, great. Great advice. I love the pause button. I think that goes for a lot of things as well, because if you don't stop and wait to see if your action had a reaction by monitoring and controlling, then you continue the entire 10 steps. You don't know which step fixed it, right? Before sometimes it fixes right away, but most times it's going to take a little bit of time to, and I've got a story about it. I won't go too deep into it, but essentially I've got, we're running this emergency procedure in the air, and step 1 or 2 fixed the problem. But I continued down the procedure like I was supposed to. So in an aircraft, you still finish the procedure till the checklist is done. However, part of that procedure removed power from some critical stuff, and it created a secondary emergency. So had I stopped, assessed the situation, not saying it would be procedurally correct, but it would have prevented a follow-on emergency. And in this case, in a project, you're usually not put in a situation where your airplane's coming out of the air, or, so I mean, you're probably okay to pause a little bit. Doc, go ahead. You got the floor, sir.
Well, but I mean, think about this. So to me, this is what baffles me. So for those of you listening, those project managers that are a little bit long in the tooth, like us that are listening, are going to realize this is all stuff we've been doing for decades. If I create a plan or a risk management plan and I don't get stakeholder buy-in, they're going to have a problem with me executing section 3.1.4, because we agreed on that. And we agreed that this was meeting those conditions. So I had to close the ops and I had to go to the emergency. We don't have time to do this democratically right now, right? That is inclusive. You heard Max say, hey, you still got to do documentation. There's a myth out there that Agilists don't plan and don't document. That's not what it says. The manifesto says document sufficiently. You got to have documentation about what was going on. When did we know? How did we know? What did we do about it? Did it do any good? And that's all empirical knowledge. Schwaber's a big fan of you know what you know because you know it because you did it. And you know it worked or it didn't work. And you did something about it. I mean, again, these concepts that everybody acts like, oh my God, this is all brand new stuff. It's not. It's just now got a whole new vernacular around it, right? Those of us that have been doing projects for paying customers for decades, you better include them, or you might fail. I'm on time, I'm on scope, I'm on budget, I'm on everything I was supposed to be on except the qualitative piece, and the customer's still pissed off, and I still get fired and don't get the next project.
Great
and
point.
You just hit on a thing that's another often overlooked, but a very important part of a successful project. And that is during project closeout, you do a lessons learned and you sit down and you document. And just the story that Jeremy was telling, in the military, we get debriefs. We don't have lessons learned conference, but we do. They're the same things. It's just that it's a different terminology in the civilian world than in the military. But, after any time that an emergency procedure has to be activated or opened, or a risk management plan has to be executed, there should be a point in the future where there's lessons learned and a debrief conducted, so that you understand why did we have to do this and what caused it, and is it sufficient going forward that our risk management plan is adequate and we can continue to operate this way? Or do we need to go back and modify our operational procedures so we don't get thrown into this risk management again? So that's the importance of documentation and ensuring that you do a very brisk and thorough lessons learned conference at the end of a big project.
Yeah. And I like you, Brent. You might have heard the word debrief, murder board, a couple other different military terminologies, but it's still going to be where you should be learning lessons, writing them down, and then passing them on to the next generation. That's what we do. We do it through policy, through books. You can do it through your project management plan or your repository, right? Your library. So whatever they sometimes use the word OPA, organizational process assets. The internal information, the old grandpa that knows everything, you're feeding them that information, so that you've got it, so you can do better next time, right? I like that. Doc mentioned something in the chat, and I know you guys can't necessarily see it, but if it's ops, right? If it's an SOP, same word, take and move the S to the end. If it's an SOP, you've done it before. That means it's routine and it's ops. If it's not, and it's temporary, unique, it's project. So really good distinction, Doc. All right. So we did about 15 on that one. We're moving on to predictive and adaptive approaches. So who wants to kick that one off?
Well, I got to segue real quick. So Jeremy, in that story you told, if the flight engineer, so the smart cat doing the work that knows the work, is doing a checklist and he realizes, hey, I have empirical confirmation that step 3 and 9 took care of the problem. And then you couple that with the empowerment, with the capability of the person on the ground doing the work, to Max's point, to stop and say, okay, I'm assessing, have I stopped the chain of events or not? If you have, now you can take a bit of a strategic pause and or take a couple seconds to breathe and think it through before you do step 6 and shut down power to the thing you just fixed with step 3. Again, that's empowerment. That's pushing decision-making. In the Navy, we call it pushing it down to the deck plates, right? I'm sure you guys call it down to the flight line or down to the field or whatever. I mean, the corporal has to know what's supposed to happen. So when they can identify when it's not happening, so they can take corrective action, because the general ain't standing there. The admiral's not standing there. The work, you have a plan or you have the emergency operation procedure, fix it to the best of your ability, to the quality that's accepted, et cetera. So again, empowering the team to execute the plan while they're executing the work, right?
Yeah, great. Yeah, down to the tactical level, the person that's doing it. I like that. All right. So predictive versus adaptive. When we say those words, it's like, okay, real quick, predictive, plan-based, adaptive, change-based. What's some of the distinctions? And I know one of the big things now, because they, on one of the more recent tests, and we don't want to time date stamp this, right? But one of the more recent tests, they've really sandwiched these things together. And so you'll get a question, and one of the first things you need to do is unpack and realize, am I talking about what methodology am I using? And are we going with something like hybrid, where it's a mix of the two? Is it plan-based, or is it, change-based or agile, if you will? So what's some of the indicators that you guys utilize to kind of figure out, how do I tell the difference?
Well, I'll just say from my experience, that was project managers seem to get annoyed or they complain about having to do reports. Monthly report. Okay, everybody needs to do a monthly report, and it gets down to weekly reports. So why am I doing this so frequently? Well, the purpose is, you don't know if you're going off the rails unless you're reporting on it. And the military adage is, you can only expect what you inspect. And that's why we spend so much wasted man hours standing in formation doing personnel inspections, because you can't expect guys to show up every day in accordance with grooming standards and proper uniform standards unless you're checking on it. And so it's, once again, you can't expect it if you don't inspect it. And it's the same way with managing a project. If you're not looking at the hours burned on a weekly basis, and you wait to, a monthly report, and all of a sudden, if you got, 27 members of a project team all charging 40 hours a week on a project, and something has gone off the rails and you let it go for a month, then you're really into the adaptive sort of environment. Whereas by realizing that the predictive environment means you got to stay on top of things, and you have to stay on the metrics. You can't just because you set up a program that my metrics are reporting at a certain periodicity, you have to constantly examine that, and especially in today's world with the technology we have today, you don't have to wait till the end of the month to get a report from accounting on your man hours. You can go into most of the management systems that the engineering systems or the enterprise resource systems that most companies have, and you can pull a manpower report, with a few keystrokes, as long as you're authorized to do it, which all project managers should be authorized to do that in a matrix environment. And you can track, are my hours burned in accordance with my production and in accordance with my plan.
Yeah, great. Yeah, good example. I like that. Doc, what do you got to add on?
So again, the big thrust is, hey, how do we adapt to PMBOK and predictive project management to agile project management? And I would argue, as I often do, they're the same, right? It's just think about the tools and the perspective. So you heard Max talking about inspection. Well, what do you do with inspection results? Hey, they're not to the standard. Well, what do? We do corrective actions. We adapt. Well, that's done in the public eye. So there's the transparency, inspection, and adaptation of Scrum in particular, but agile project management specifically. And oh, by the way, Max hit on it. It's not like Agilists made all this stuff up. Project managers, whether they're called coaches or not, project managers, good ones, don't wait until we run the monthly report to find out we burned 900 extra hours and the customer's going to be pissed off. We're doing inspections and we're pulling check reports and we're inspecting and adapting as we go so that we're not surprised at the end of the reporting cycle, because it's way too late to do anything about it then, and you appear very predictive, not agile.
Yeah, great point. I mean, that kind of brings up into mind iterative and incremental, right? Where you've got iterative and stakeholder comes to you and say, I need some way for missiles to stop rusting when they're in the silo. Okay, great. Let's try this chemical. Did it work? Not work. Let's try this chemical. Did it work? Not work. How about this one? Iterative, right? You're constantly going back to the stakeholder. Does this work? Does this work? Does this work? Is this your solution? Incremental, you're building a house or whatever, or you're building or a bridge, and you say, okay, we're going to put the pylons in, and then let's go inspect them, and let's add to that. Now we're going to put the cross beams on. Let's inspect it, make sure the tensile strength's all's good and it meets spec. Okay, let's pave the road. Inspect it. Great. That was incremental because you knew the plan was to build the bridge the whole time, and you kind of knew what you were doing, but you want to do it in increments to get stakeholder buy-in along the path, so that you don't get all the way to under the bridge and it's a bridge to nowhere. Oh, darn it, we put it in the wrong location. That would be bad. So that's an example that you might see in a PMBOK or something. The next big thing on the adaptive versus predictive, if you're the project manager and a stakeholder brings you a problem, what is one way you might choose which approach you would take? How would you, did you use so I'll bring in one model, like they've got the Stacy's complexity model, I believe is what it is. And it basically has got a XY axis, and one of them's technical difficulty. And the other side is requirements difficulty. Like, can you get the equipment and the materials that you need and everything? And if it's simple, it doesn't mean the job was simple. Like building a bridge isn't simple, but it could be very plan based. You know exactly what you're doing, so you go do it, like building a house. Or you need to figure out how to cash checks from your phone. That may be more complex, more unknowns, so it falls further up the chaos side of things. So you may pick more adaptive, so you get that information feedback loop faster, versus building a bridge. You could probably go sit in a boardroom and plan it up. Is that something you guys have seen in the marketplace or in the workplace?
Well, I would just make a comment more than anything. What you first started with about when a stakeholder comes to you and asks you a question. you need to have it delineated in your project plan. Okay, that in the change management plan, probably, when something like this comes up, are we going to do predictive analysis or prescriptive? And if you come to me as a stakeholder and say, look, I've got to have this feature in this product, okay, that's prescriptive. Okay, if he comes to you and says, look, we're losing market share and we just need a better product that, to help us in the marketplace, okay, then you start predicting. You're in the predictive arena. So you got to make sure that everybody's on the same page when you're trying to come up with a solution or make a change to something that everyone has agreed to.
I like that. I like the way you put that. I mean, if you're dealing with a small change to an existing product, something you already know a lot about, you can run it predictively. Or if something major, right, you get closer to the chaos unknown envelope, you may need to do it adaptively.
Exactly.
Doc, any more to add to that?
As I was listening to Max talk and then relating to his earlier point, I think frequency is a big component too. Right. So if you inspect every 90 days, you're not going to find stuff as fast as if you're doing it every 9 days. Now you have to balance, hey, is 9 days too prohibitive? Are my guys and gals busy creating reports instead of doing project work? Right. So you got to strike a balance, but you have to have that communication flow. You got to have that awareness of the actions that you're taking in accordance with the plan. To Max's point that everybody signed off on. We have agreement on how we're going to do what we're going to do, and everybody agreed up front. I'm not going to haggle this when we get done and somebody's pissed off. Like, hey, we're all adults and we made the assumption in the project plan that you would tell us if you wanted something different and you didn't. So, I mean, I'll work with you to fix it, but you get to be responsible and accountable too, right? Mm-hmm. How do you find stuff out faster? Your frequency.
Gosh, that's
right?
It's brilliant, right? It seems so simple, but when you say it out loud, it's brilliant. It's the frequency, and I agree. Great point, Max. It's, if you had some bumpers in there, you might say more than once a week is probably too much, and less than once a month may be too long, right? So get that stakeholder closer to the decision. And that way they're culpable in whatever's going on. They're in the result of the work, they're seeing it, right? So it's almost prototyping each iteration of it.
I think one of the golden nuggets of management, and especially project management and project team leadership, is the decades old concept of management by walking around. I mean, the problem with the pandemic era where everyone was working remotely and no one was face to face is, if someone sends you an email and says they're going to deliver something to you on a certain time plan, you take it at face value. And yes, okay, they said next Thursday, 4:00, I'd have it. So that's what you're counting on. If you meet somebody at the coffee machine and you say, hey, that thing you owe me is due Thursday at 4:00. Are you going to have it ready? The way they respond to you and the way they answer, oh, okay, I need to go back and adjust because I'm not going to get this, regardless of the fact they tell me yes, because they have every intention of doing their dead level best to get it done, but it's not going to happen. And you don't pick up that information without being out in the workplace. And one of the things I enjoyed most about working in a manufacturing facility is putting on a hard hat and steel toes and safety goggles and going down and walking through the plant and spending time. Number one, I built up an expectation that I was going to be on the plant floor, and everybody knew to expect me, especially when my projects were running down the line. They knew I was going to be there, but I'd be there at other times too, because one of the line operators told me that his son was playing football on Friday night. And on Monday, I want to stop by and say, hey, how'd he do? And even though I don't have a product going down his line, he's still one of my team members. And even though he may not be working on a project of mine right now, he will be in 2 weeks, and he did last week. And so it's just part of that good old servant leadership that we learn in the military. That's one of the most prime things that we take into the civilian workforce is the servant leadership, and the fact we really, I can't count on both my hands a number of times people that I've worked with look at me with this astonished look on their face and said, I believe you really care about me. And I'm astonished at them. Of course I care about you. I want you to be successful, because unless you're successful, we are not going to be successful. And if we are not successful, the company is not going to be successful. And if the company is not successful, the project is not going to be successful. So yes, I do care about you, but it's a noticeable thing. It's that leadership quality that no one can describe to you what leadership is, but everybody recognizes it when they see it.
Oh man, great words, right? It's the pre-work. It's the pre-work before the project. You're building that trust and empathy of that team member that may be a potential team member. So don't overlook that. I think that's wonderful words. And then when you are the project manager, that care and feeding, that building of the team doesn't stop. It just gets more, right? Because now they're one of you. Put them under the wing and say, you're one of mine now. Let's watch this thing, and you're always looking. So I like that. I really well said as we wrap this up. Doc, what do you got?
So, back to that management by walking around. I think that's just an amazing thing. And it's probably how we were raised, but to Mac's point, when that guy knows you're going to come down and check on an umbilical going down his line, and when he knows you're all going to come down and check on his boys' game on Friday, what you're demonstrating to him is, I'm here for you if you need something. My job as management is to make sure you expert got what you need to make timely decisions as accurately as you can make them to get stuff done. So you're successful, I'm successful, company's successful, and we all get paid. Right.
Right on.
And that is that servant leadership, and it's absolutely critical. And when we go in to consult with companies on projects, and they're bleeding out money, but they can't figure out why, that's one of the first places I start. Hey, can I shadow a couple of your project managers? Can I shadow a couple of your foremen? Right? Because you'll see a couple things, lots of meetings, which means they're not doing project work. And hey, my door's always open. And every time I walk by there, I just take note of how many times the door was closed. And then I bring that up my final report to management, right? It's often management, and it's often because they're there to get a paycheck maybe, and not there to take care of the folks that will get them all paychecks and bonuses, right? So I think that's important. That consistency, to Mac's point, is you can't just be down there checking on stuff when they owe you something. Agreed. Let them set the expectation that you're there, accessible to them, and they don't have to come find you. They can do it right there on the shop floor.
Agreed.
And they'll tell you stuff on that shop floor they won't tell you in their office when they come in there and it's all formal, right, Max?
Exactly. There's a different conversation occurs around a conference table that occurs around an extruding machine. That's a hard-learned lesson.
Yeah, good. Yeah, for sure. All right. So last parting shot, you got the floor, Max, and then we will wrap this episode up, and we will see you guys next time.
Well, once again, I just want to emphasize what a great job you guys are doing, and the opportunity that you guys are providing to show the path that guys and gals can come out of the military and take this invisible training that they've received. I've never seen anywhere on a progress report or an annual report or a fitness report or anything else about someone's project management skills, but that we're all judged on that every day. We're all trained in how to do that. The expectation is set. And you can parlay that into, to use Doc's words, a lucrative career once you get out of the military. We all know that we're paid only a subsistence salary when we're in the military. because it's back to the old warrior creed. There's no sense paying you enough money to build up a savings or a retirement, because we expect you to die on the battlefield. And so that we're not going to pay you that. But what you do is you take the 4 or the 10 or the 20 or the 30 years that you spend in the military, and you gain education, you gain experience, you build relationships and develop networks, because every one of us doing like what you're doing, if they spread out like fingers. Once they leave the military, they go into different industries, they go to work for different companies, do this stuff. But you've got this wonderful relationship network that you can utilize. And it's something that if you enjoyed being a leader in the military and rising to a leadership position, you'll enjoy being a project manager in the civilian world, because it's the same thing. It's mission accomplishment, but we call it project completion. But it's the same thing. You get that same feeling. And, you do the same thing. When a successful project ends, you go have a celebration, or if it's a long project, when you reach a milestone. And one of the best things about working for BP, they were the most competent at recognizing successful intermediate milestones in a project. And they insisted that you conducted a celebration for the milestone, and upper management would come and participate in it. And it was a great thing. And it's just like Friday after E Club, Friday afternoon, and same thing. So
gotta love it. You gotta love it. Yeah. And milestone, right? Hitting different parts of the project. So I love it. One project can be broken into many, or it can be broken into milestones for one single project. So way to bring that up. And we'll definitely hit an episode on milestones and phases. So I tune in for more to come.
And I'd like to give you guys a little bit of feedback. That first podcast we did, I had people reach out to me. I had a Navy captain who was retiring, the commanding officer at Gulfport CB Center, reached out to me, connected on LinkedIn, said, "Hey, saw the podcast, and yeah, I think I want to get into project management after the Navy." I had an E4 contact me, and a diver in from a mobile diving and salvage unit says, "Hey, I see you were a Navy diver, and yeah, I don't think I'm going to make a career of the Navy, but I've learned one of the big things they stress in dive school is dive management, is how applicable is dive management to project management." And I said, "Brother, you got it. Same thing. It's the same thing. You're accomplishing a task safely and successfully, on time and on budget. Same thing. You know how to do it." So
rock on. Yeah, I think that's great. Great feedback. Great news. And I couldn't agree more. I think you'll find meaning and you'll find purpose in what you're doing as a project manager. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the PM Pathfinder series and want to join the profession, certify, or maintain your PDUs by visiting vets2pm.com and looking up Project Manager Essential Toolbox or a bootcamp.